So before we begin, I would just like to state for the record that today is November 9th, 2021, and my name is Ben Bauman, and I'm here in Indianapolis, Indiana, and I'm speaking via phone with David Jones, who is in Scottsdale, Arizona, and we are doing an interview for the Indiana Legislative Oral History Initiative. So just starting off, when and where were you born?
I was born at Methodist Hospital in Indianapolis, Indiana, February the 25th of 1948.
And what were your parents' names?
Lewis F. Jones and Elsie Tony, Toney, Jones.
Okay. And where was your family from before Indiana?
They actually have been the Joneses have been in Indiana for about 5 generations.
Wow, okay, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah, originally settled in Switzerland County in the town of VB, Indiana.
Wow, that's cool, okay. And what were your parents' occupations?
My father was worked for Atkins Saw Works in Indianapolis in metallurgy.
Okay.
And Atkins was a big company. They had, about 550 employees. And they took the whole block, several blocks on the street where now the part of the stadium complex is part of.
Oh, okay. Sure. Interesting. All right. Do you have any siblings?
I have 5.
Okay, 5. Wow, all right. And how would you describe your childhood overall?
Well, I think it was pretty normal, although I grew up in an area called Mars Hill, which was a low socioeconomic area.
Okay.
But my folks had a grocery store there, so it was kind of the focal point of the community.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Wow. And who would you say were the most influential people in your childhood?
Well, my parents were most influential, but my oldest brother was also very influential. He was 22 years older than I.
Okay.
And,
wow, yeah.
Although we didn't live under the same house at the same time, but he was a real mentor and a successful businessman and just a good person.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, wow. What understanding did you have about your family's political beliefs growing up?
Well, my father was a Democrat precinct committeeman for a number of years.
Okay.
And the family on both sides were predominantly Democrats.
Yeah.
And I think I was one of the first, if not the first, to register as a Republican.
Oh, okay. And how was your family's reaction to that?
Overall, they were supportive.
Okay.
I think at that time, I had run in the primary for Justice of the Peace when I was 25 and lost by 22 votes in the primary at 25 precincts. So I lost by less than 1 vote per precinct.
Yeah. Against
an incumbent. But that was my first endeavor. And then the second, I ran for city council. And frankly, in those days, in Marion County, the Republicans, I felt, afforded good leadership and promoted good government. And that's why I wanted to be a Republican.
Sure, okay. What schools did you attend growing up?
Stephen Decatur Elementary School and Decatur Central High School.
Okay. And how do you view your educational experiences looking back?
They were good. It was a good experience. The elementary school I went to was only about 2 years old, so it was a new facility.
Okay.
And then went to Decatur Junior High, which was in the old high school. The new one was under construction, but I ended up graduating from the new facility there on Highway 67 in 1966.
Okay. Did you have any favorite subjects in school?
Yeah, I like science, geography, and history.
Oh, okay.
My strong suits.
Yeah. Were you involved in any extracurricular activities?
Oh, I played basketball on the junior high, on the elementary school
Okay.
basketball team, and other than that, I don't recall anything else that they didn't have too many clubs.
Right. Yeah. Did you have any particular views about the state of Indiana or about being someone from Indiana when you were a kid?
No, if that's where you've grown up and all your relatives grew up there,
Yeah.
and you went to school there, it's your home, and you don't know any difference.
Sure.
There's nothing
Sure.
to compare it with. So I didn't. I felt that Indiana had a good legacy, a good history to it, and I always was proud to say I was a Hoosier.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Did you attend college?
Attended Indiana State, but that was for 1 year, and then I wanted to be. I left home when I was 16.
Oh, wow.
And I lived at a mortuary most of my early days. I commuted back and forth to school.
Wow.
So I wanted to be a mortician, and I then went to Indiana College Mortuary Science, graduated from there, and got my general director's license and my embalmer's license.
Wow. Okay. Interesting. What got you interested in that?
Well, it was. I think what actually impressed me was I was in Methodist Hospital, had my tonsils removed.
Yeah.
And my mother and sister were there, and my mother said, "Well, there's Roy Jones and Keith Matthews, somebody from Brownsburg. They own the mortuary in Brownsburg. Somebody from home must have passed away." And so they came by, and they were both immaculately dressed and very courteous, and they knew my mom, and I was impressed with them. But then years went by. My sophomore year, I had a course in occupation and careers, and you had to make a report on an occupation or career, and they had a whole file. And I went to mortician, and I pulled it out and read about it and gave my report on it. And it said in the report that sometimes local mortuaries would hire young people to work at the mortuary. So when I got my license, I went to our minister, which my mother's church there on the south side, and told them that I was thinking about being a mortician, and if they heard or knew of any openings, I would like. Well, they started making some phone calls, and it was a large church there on right off Fletcher Avenue.
Yeah.
And so next thing I knew, I had an interview with J.C. Wilson Funeral Home, and I started to work there in November of 1964.
Interesting. Okay. Wow.
Then from there, I worked there from October of 64 until May of 65.
Okay.
And then I had a job offer at Conkle Funeral Home on Lyndhurst, which was on my side of town. And they needed a student, actually two students. Most of the students that worked for funeral homes were college.
Okay.
But I was in high school at the time, and they had an apartment there, and I think I was making around $50 a week, which was big money.
Yeah, sure.
A high school kid in 1965. So I worked for them until until the following fall, and then I enrolled in Indiana State and worked for B.J. Ryan Funeral Home at 602 South 7th Street in Terre Haute, and came back and did my internship at Tobin, Her, Singleton, and worked there for 5 years, and then went to Flannery Buchanan Funeral Home.
Okay.
was manager of the Marwood Chapel, which was on Man Road, which was in my community, the community I grew up in.
Right.
And then my brothers and I, and sister-in-law, bought a funeral home in Mooresville, the Harvey Funeral Home, and it now operates under the Jones family mortuary.
Okay. Interesting. Wow. And so when you started your career in the funeral home business, in what ways did your awareness of politics start to change and you started to get interested in politics?
Well, at that point, I had worked at the polls even when I was in high school.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so I started getting an idea of how the party operated and what its mission was, its goals, its platform. And then a friend of mine announced he was running for trustee, and he owned a local drugstore, Norm Richard.
Okay.
And he encouraged me to sign up to run for justice of the peace. I really can't say that I was qualified, but in those days you didn't have to be a lawyer to be justice of the peace. I don't even know if you have to today. To be honest.
Okay. Yeah.
But that was the primary race that I lost by 22 votes.
Yeah.
And so that got me interested. And then as an old sage told me, he said, for first time running against an incumbent and just losing by 22 votes, the party will come to you. And so they did. They approached me and said, well, what would you like to run for? And I said, well, I've always been interested in House of Representatives, but I think I'd like to run for city council if there's an opening. And at the time, the seat was held by Keith Walters, who was, his family owned Walters drugstore. And he was my fifth grade basketball coach, and I taught in my elementary school. Man, I really respected. Mm-hmm. But he won as a Democrat, and so the Republicans wanted to take him out, and they thought I would have a shot at it. And so I did. I ran, and I won.
Wow, okay. Interesting. Wow.
There was a large freshman class. I think we ended up with like 7 freshmen.
Wow.
And, of course, the council, people out here just can't get over, the council in those days was 25 members, mm-hmm. 29 members, 25 districts, and then 4 at large.
Yeah.
And that's a big council.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting, okay. So it's about 25 members, and there were 7 new members?
Yeah.
Jeez, okay.
Dr. Phil Borst, myself, Stu Rhodes, Stan Strader, Wayne Rader, mm-hmm. Betty, gosh, I forget her name now. But anyway, there were a lot of freshmen.
Wow. Let's see, thinking about your family and stuff, when, if at all, did you get married?
In 1971.
Okay.
I married Sue Ellen Kiewit.
Okay.
Who, graduated from Ben Davis, and although we were down at Indiana State at the same time, I just saw her one time, but then that summer I asked her out for a date, and then we got married. We were married 50 years.
Wow.
And she passed away a year ago this month.
Oh, no, okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry to hear that. Do you have any children?
We have 2 sons.
Okay.
David Andrew Jones and Brett Anthony Jones.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. All right. And how influential would you say your family was when it came to your political career?
Well, because it was a large family, and we had pretty good recognition in the community because my folks had a grocery store there for 30-some-odd years. Sure. And then my brother, who also lived in the community, had a trucking company. And so we had pretty good name recognition, family name recognition with a good reputation.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. And Let's see, when you started to get interested in running for the Indiana General Assembly, what exactly sort of shaped your political outlook?
Well, I think getting there was an interesting process, and I'll share with you, Ben.
Yeah.
What happened was Doris Dorbecker, who was one of the representatives, one of three representatives that represented our district. Marion County had multi-member districts. Mm-hmm. And so in our district, we had three members, one of which was Doris Dorbecker. And Doris had contracted cancer, and Senator Morris Mills called me one day and said, Doris, Representative Dorbecker would like to talk to you. And then he told me that her health was not good and she probably wasn't going to make it through the session.
Wow. Okay.
And I had no idea what she wanted to talk about, but I always respected her. And
yeah.
I met her down in the chamber, and she said, David, I'm not going to make it through this year, and I think that you should consider putting your hat into the ring for my seat. And I said, well, I'm really humbled that you would ask me, but the way that the district is set up, I don't know that I've got all the numbers exactly right. I'm going by memory, but
right.
Perry Township had 80 votes. Decatur had 25. Franklin Township had like 12. Wayne Township had about 15. And it was obvious that all three of the incumbent legislators were all from Perry Township because they had the votes. Mm-hmm. And in the primary. But I shared that with her, and she said, well, I think, David, that I will endorse you. And I think that will, if you go out and work, that you might be surprised how much support you would get. So we went to slating. There were 9 candidates at slating, including fellow councilwoman, Beulah Cohenauer. And it was only the two of us that the party had endorsed. The others had never been elected to public office.
Okay, yeah.
And I think that was an advantage. But a newspaper reporter, I thought it was Pat Trump, once told me that, I think, David, you probably hold some kind of record. Because, as he and I were talking, because I had to go through the slating for the city council amongst Marion County Republican organization, you had to be slated. Then I had to go through the primary. Then I went through the general election. Then, when Doris passed away, they had a special slating, and I went through that slating, and then went to I got the nod to fill the remainder of her term, and then went through another slating to get reelected, and another primary, another fall. So that all happened in a 24-month period.
Yeah, wow.
And it's just a bit of irony to it, but it was, by the time I got finished, Ben, I wasn't even certain why I was doing all that.
Yeah, I can imagine. That seems like a ton of stuff to go through.
Oh, yeah, you have to contact all the precinct committeemen, vice precinct committeemen, the ward chairman, the area chairman, and get their blessings, tell them why you feel you're qualified for the job, why you want it. And so, time I got there, I was really questioning why I did it, but I'm glad I did.
Right, I understand. And so when you started running for the General Assembly, were there like any key issues or legislation that you wanted to work on, or was it more of just getting elected and then figuring things out?
It was really a process. I learned from being on the council that when you're a freshman, you're not going to get dealt major pieces of legislation or city ordinances. And I would say that my first they asked what committees you'd be interested in. Well, obviously, cities and towns was a committee that I had direct experience with, that I could speak as a former city county councilor. And then transportation, public safety. I try to look at the committees that I thought impacted my constituents directly. Now, I did find, Ben, a difference between, I think Thomas Jefferson once said that the best government is that government closest to the public.
Yeah.
And the city council is that. I mean, you get the phone calls from the chuckles and the trash pickup and drainage and the things that directly. When you go to the legislature, you're kind of removed from it. I mean, you're going to pass the laws that impact their lives, but it's a much broader horizon.
Sure.
And I did enjoy that. I know that a lot of people have a negative connotation applied to lobbyists.
Right.
But I found that lobbyists were very helpful. They were knowledgeable about the areas and the clients they represented.
Yeah.
And contrary to some public, I found most of them to be truthful.
Mm-hmm.
Now you had to be a person to ask the right questions.
Okay.
And one of the things that came out to me on the city council, a Indianapolis Star reporter by the name of, I think it was Mike Ellis, he wrote an article, a little column about, the most traveled counselor, the most conscientious, and he listed me as the toughest counselor. And he said, Counselor, I'm paraphrasing now.
Right.
He said, Counselor Jones asked tough questions, even when it appears he favors the subject. And I guess I kind of took that to heart, that when you go to the legislature, you're representing the people, and they can't be there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's your job to, and I try to use a little critical thinking of who wants the bill, why did they want it, and what's the unintended consequences of that bill.
Sure.
That don't pop out at you, but you kind of have to, you can't read every one of them contrary to popular opinion, but you do read those that go before your committee, and I would read the ones that I thought had some real impact on people in the broader picture.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, that's kind of, I felt that my strength was really working in the committees.
Yeah. Interesting. All right. And I guess so. That makes sense. When you're serving in the General Assembly, I suppose that you have to be pretty aware of all the different things going on, and I imagine that constituents probably appreciate someone asking questions to lobbyists and everything else going on.
Yeah, they do, but it really, I don't know how to phrase this, but they don't follow the legislature. I would say a high percentage of the people in your district couldn't name who their state representative was.
Right.
Is.
Yeah.
It might be a little different in the council because the council district was smaller. I think my House district had 144,000 people in it.
Sure.
So they're not down there every day, and they may not follow it. The other thing that I found of interest, just a sidebar note, was that legislators from like Evansville or Marion or Richmond, from the outlying area of Marion County, they really got more exposure, more media exposure in their communities. Mm-hmm. Well, when you're a representative in Marion County, there's so much news going on every day that it's easily overlooked.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, I suppose there's a lot more in cities that is newsworthy, I suppose, for people and that people are interested in. Did you have any sort of political mentors in the General Assembly when you served, or did you have any like political heroes in general that you kind of identified your political philosophy with, or?
Well, there were a number of people, very stellar people. J. Roberts Daley was the Speaker of the House, and he certainly was a polished gentleman and a good politician. Now, he got taken out by the Indiana State Teachers Association. They had a friction for a number of years, and then J. Roberts Daley was not in favor of parimutuel betting, and there were a number of Hoosiers, and the big populace at that point was in favor of it, and he stopped it 2 or 3 years, maybe 4 years in a row, but it finally got through the House.
Okay. Yeah.
And there are a number of others. T.C. Coleman was chairman of transportation, and I was ranking member as a freshman, but I learned a lot from him. And there were others that I kind of watched them as to what they were, what positions they took, and why they took them. So that has some bearing, and I think that's indicative of many legislators when they go in, is that if the person's the chairman of education and they've been chairman for 10 years, when the subject of education comes up, that's the person you go to and say, well, who really wants this bill? What's the unintended consequences of it? And they would be forthright, and then you might go to, at that point, the chief lobbyist for ISTA, Indiana State Teachers Association, Bob Margraf, a hardworking lobbyist and very astute, along with Nancy Pappas. And if I had questions as it related to education, they would be the ones that I would go to.
Okay.
I served on Ways and Means under Pat Kiley. He was a stellar representative and a good chairman of Ways and Means, and I learned a lot from him.
Yeah, okay, sure. That's good.
Am I telling you more than what you really care to know?
No, this is what I want. I mean, the goal is for you to share as much information as you possibly can. So don't worry at all. This is, your oral history. So it's whatever that you want to share. Let's see. Thinking about your campaign again for the General Assembly, I know that you weren't really guided necessarily by a particular political sort of legislation that you wanted to get passed or something like that initially. But did you have a sort of a campaign strategy at all that you utilized to help get yourself elected?
Well, the strategy was, and frankly, in those days, if you were a Republican, particularly if you had Perry Township, Decatur Township, and portions of Wayne Township and Franklin, and then just a little bit of South Center Township.
Yeah.
But if you got it through the primary, you were going to get elected.
Okay.
Unless there's some aberration,
right,
the Republican organization would pull through. So you the strategy was to read from the script of the party and address what the party's platform was, and you had a high percentage of getting elected. I think in every year that I ran, I led the ticket amongst my other two members, and they were both from Perry Township, and I was kind of proud of that.
Yeah, that's cool. What did you think about the election process? Did it seem like a good process, or were there things that you wish were different about it?
Well, Marion County was unique. I thought that every county had slating, and that's really where the party precinct committeeman, vice precinct committeeman, ward chairman, the political operatives made the choice.
Right.
and I have benefited from that. And then there were, the last time I ran outside the party's endorsement, and it was a strong organization. Now, as I look now, it appears that especially when you look at the council, there's more influence. The Republicans have lost the mayor's seat, and I think they've lost control of the council. And that may be a shift in demographics of people, but I was fortunate to work with Dick Lugar, Bill Hudnut, Steve Goldsmith, three dynamic mayors who really pushed Indianapolis to the forefront of the national scene. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to be a Republican, because I thought they had good, strong leaders. And they did.
Yeah. Okay.
When I got to the House of Representatives, I found that there was, I saw in almost the 9.5 years I was there, a shifting. I was basically a fiscal conservative, a social moderate.
Okay.
And, I didn't fit their bill as being conservative enough. And primarily it was over the abortion issue.
Okay.
And the party just felt that they wanted someone that would walk that line, and I had a more moderate view of that.
Yeah.
And they, well, in any case, that was the outcome and the conclusion of my political career at that point.
So do you feel like you were kind of like just pushed out a little bit, or?
Well, yeah, I would say so.
Okay.
I think the other thing was that Paul Manweiler wanted to be Speaker of the House, and he did. I was supporting Dan Steffen, and that had there were a number of entities in transportation in Indiana who wanted me to be chairman of transportation, but because I didn't support him, I didn't get chairmanship.
Okay.
And the person that he appointed there turned out to be a rather embarrassing individual, but nevertheless.
Okay.
Yeah, I was on the outs.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Thinking about your very first election win for the General Assembly, how did you feel after you found out that you were elected?
Well, it was election night, and I felt good about it. Now, I think it's important to note that I didn't go through a general election the first go-around. The state statute, the state constitution, that when there's a vacancy in the legislative body, the precinct committeeman, the vice precinct committee, the party gets to choose.
Okay.
So that slating was, in fact, my first election to the House.
Right.
And then I think I finished up the last 5 or 6 months of Doris's term, Representative Doris Storbecker.
Yeah.
And then I went to the general election, or primary, and then general election. And, it's very gratifying because you always think every politician believes that the day that you're elected that everybody loves you. And that's not true.
Right. Yeah.
But on the day that you're defeated, you think everybody hates you. But that's not true either.
Sure.
It's just the wind, as the winds blow on that time period, a dispensation of what people think and what the party, particularly in Marion County, what the party leaders tell them.
Yeah. Okay.
So in answer to your question, the slating process, I see some advantages of it. I see the advantages that Republicans controlled who they wanted but it also eliminates people that might want to run if they don't get the party endorsement.
Yeah.
Back then, it was like 25 votes per precinct against you before you even got started.
Wow.
Per precinct.
Yeah.
So it's a big undertaking.
Yeah, sounds like it. And so, just to clarify, when you left, did you run again and lose the election, or did you just resign, or you just didn't, or you just retired?
Well, I went back to the slating process,
Uh-huh.
and they replaced me with Representative Bob Daney.
Oh, okay.
He was from Wayne Township.
Yeah.
And so then I decided to run outside the slate and got defeated. I won in Decatur Township, my own community, but lost it in Hendricks County and in Morgan County.
Okay. Yeah, so that's an interesting dynamic at play that I don't think I've heard a lot about. But it is interesting to think about, how much influence the party has when it comes to what candidates are running and how much support they get. And so, did you feel like when you were running and you weren't really the party's chosen choice and you decided to run outside of their endorsement, did you feel like it was a pretty big uphill battle then?
Oh, yeah. Now, there was uphill battle, but I'd also, I'd been in elected office for about 13, 14 years.
Yeah.
So I had some name recognition, but the party was organized back in those days, and they would pump up their precinct commitment to vote for the slated candidate.
Yeah.
And so they worked it, but I forget now how many votes I lost by, but I think it was like 300 or 400, maybe about 300, I think.
Okay.
And it's an uphill battle.
Yeah.
But if you believe that you're right, and you can get up in the morning, look yourself in the mirror, and believe that you are a good representative of the people, then I think you owe it to yourself and your constituents to get out there and tell your side of the story.
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Throughout your political career, did your campaigns or strategies change over time, or were they pretty much the same?
It pretty much remained the same, except when I ran outside the party. Then I really got full control over the campaign.
Yeah.
When you're part of the organization and you're a 3-member group, then you kind of have to coordinate with your other 2 representatives as to what kind of message you're going to say. You don't want to contradict a fellow representative, and so you kind of lay out your platform and your talking points, and you go along with them, and each one of us had a different area of contribution to our campaign effort. Mm-hmm. Individually, but for the most part, it was kind of cookie cutter.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I understand. When you walked into the State House for your first day in office, how did you feel?
Well, I've always been a lover of history.
Yeah.
And when you walk into the building and you realize all of the history behind it, the people who have walked those halls, the major legislation has passed out that impacted the lives of Hoosiers throughout the state, it's a very humbling experience.
Sure. Yeah, I bet. What expectations did you have about the legislative process, and was it more or less complicated than you expected?
Well, it is a complicated process, and over the years, while I was in the legislature, I would be invited to middle schools or to some high school government classes, and would go through the process of how a draft bill became law. And I think by the time I got finished, there were a lot of glassy eyes. They don't realize the process.
Yeah.
But I think overall the process was pretty good. I think, Ben, that one of the most interesting years that actually I think it was a 2-year period. We had a tie for the first time in the Indiana House of Representatives.
Yes,
50 Democrats, 50 Republicans. And many of the political beat reporters were, this is going to be chaotic and this is going to, how is this going to work? And it became, each party, the Democrats and Republicans, elected their own Speaker of the House. And they would alternate every other day in the session. And then, as far as chairman was concerned, that would alternate.
Yes.
And to be honest with you, Ben, I thought to myself that, this is really how democracy should work, because neither single party had the upper hand.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a case if you had a piece of legislation and you're going to present it on the floor of the House for third reading, and because you're a Republican, all the Republicans would vote for it. But in most cases, you would get all the Republican votes. And in this case, you needed to really work both sides of the aisle.
Right. Yeah.
And same with in the committees. It wasn't that you're going to ramrod legislation through. You needed to really make your case and sell both sides. You needed votes from both sides.
Sure, yeah.
And I found that was rewarding. And in the 9.5 years that I served, I never lost a bill on the House floor.
Wow, okay.
No, I had friends on both sides of the aisle. I treated them with respect. And I think to a certain degree, everyone wants to believe that politics prevails. It's the muscle behind it. But and there's only probably 2% of the bills that we pass that had political ramifications to it.
Yeah.
One of which is the drawing of the maps.
Sure.
Representative. That has a major influence on the outcome of the composition of the House of Representatives. And I just found that, if you treat people decent and treat them with the same respect that you want, and you can make your case on the floor. I was so appalled when I came out to Arizona. I was hired as president and CEO of the Arizona Contractors Association and was their chief lobbyist along with my son, who was, we both lobbied. And a bill could come up before committee, and the legislator hasn't even read it yet. He's signed on to it.
Oh
they sponsored the bill, and the staff would read the bill to the committee, and then the staff would answer any questions about the bill.
Yikes.
Well, that wasn't the case. In Indiana, you had to know what your bill said.
Right. Yeah.
And so I just thought that was appalling.
Yeah. I can imagine, especially as a former, legislator yourself. That's disturbing. So, thinking about this 50-50 tie in the General Assembly, did you feel like the General Assembly was more productive during that time versus other times you had served where it wasn't a tied?
Yes, I did, because the arrogance of power can offend and agitate people. When there's a level playing field, I think you get a kinder, gentler, and more respectful atmosphere. Yeah. So I thought it was positive from that standpoint.
Yeah, interesting. And so, a lot more people are forced to work together and forced to find policies that will fit both parties, I guess.
That's right. That's exactly right. Which, maybe I'm idealistic, but should work for the benefit of all Hoosiers.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if it's 50-50, then you would think that the population is fairly split as well, to a certain extent at least. So, But yeah, that's interesting. I'm sure that was a really fascinating time to serve, and considering how different things are today now, where it's not close at all to being split down the middle.
Oh, that's right. Well, and you can thank a lot of that to gerrymandering.
Yeah. Speaking of which, yeah, I mean, how influential would you say gerrymandering was during your service in the General Assembly?
I thought it was very influential. Marion County, as I indicated, was the only county that had a multi-member structure.
Okay.
And the way it was cut for those districts, those members were all going to be Republicans, and they were.
Yeah.
And other areas the same way. But Arizona was similar, Ben. When I came out here, Congressional District Number 1 went all the way up, taking in the Navajo Nation, portion of the Navajo Nation, coming all the way south to taking in the portions of, it took in all of Scottsdale, a portion of Phoenix. And if you think about it, what would those people in the Navajo Nation have in common, social and economic, to people who live in Scottsdale?
Right. Yeah.
You know, how do you rationalize that? The only way you rationalize it is that you're drawing a district that's going to win Republican vote.
Yeah. I understand. Was there any effort when you served to try and limit the influence of gerrymandering at all, or was it?
Well, there were, and there was a case that went, I think, all the way to Supreme Court about multi-member districts in Marion County.
Okay.
Now, I don't remember how that came out, but eventually I think they did away with multi-member districts.
Okay, yeah.
Now, I'm not positive about that. I've been away for
Sure, I understand.
25 years. I haven't followed it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting process. But yeah, I guess that's one of the things that continues to be an issue that people talk about a lot, and it hasn't changed much. So
it hasn't, and both parties endeavor to use it
right
to their advantage. But I'm convinced that you can get a computer today when you plug in the criteria, the population. Some courts have ruled that do the people have the same economic interest? Do they read from the same publications, your news media? Do they get the same exposure? And I can tell you that the people up in Navajo country don't get the same news exposure, news exposure as do people from Scottsdale or Phoenix.
Right.
And there's just as the population changes, demographics change in Marion County, and it appears that many of the Republicans have moved out to the suburban areas, and those areas like Johnson County and Morgan County and Hendricks County, but those have become Republican bastions, and Marion County, based on what I can observe, is there are more Democrats voting in that county now.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's interesting to see how those things change. How did you keep up on what your constituents wanted and stuff when you served?
Well, the party has organizational meetings. On Monday mornings, I attended the Perry Township organizational meeting. We met at the Holiday Inn. It was a breakfast. Then after that meeting, John Sweezy, the Marion County chairman, would have a luncheon meeting. So you'd go to that meeting, and then you would go over to the State House and go to a caucus meeting, and then go to session. I belong to every Republican club in my district, Franklin Township Republican Club, Perry Township Republican Club, Decatur Township, Wayne Township, and you're expected to attend those. And then I belong to the Lions Club, the Optimist Club, the 40 West Club, business organizations, and service clubs, Masonic Lodge. And so by attending those meetings, you could get feedback. And that was, I think, a big portion of, you're not in a silo. You've got to be out. You got to press the flesh. You have to hear what people's concerns are. And it's very time consuming.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
And then endeavor to maintain a job.
Right. Let's see, thinking about your legislation stuff that you worked on, the General Assembly, do you remember the first bill that you sponsored?
No, I don't.
Okay, that's all right.
I think it was a bill coming out of transportation.
Okay.
But I don't remember what it was.
Yeah.
I think the most impactful legislation was that Senator Bill Sorts and I sponsored legislation to change the structure of the Indiana State Fair Board.
Okay.
The Indiana State Fair Board had been it was considered a political plum. Of all the boards that were sought after, highly sought after, the setting on the Indiana State Fair Board was the plum.
Interesting.
And you had to be in with your party, or you had to be in with the governor, and you had to be stronger than a garlic malt. But the problem was, they had so much autonomy that, and both my boys were in 4-H. I'd been out to the fair, and I could see that the 4-H facilities, the dormitories, they needed painting. There was just a lot of things. And so I sponsored this legislation to totally restructure the Fair Board.
Okay.
And the Indiana Farm Bureau, which had strong influence over every governor, they had, usually it was their pick of the majority members of that Fair Board.
Yeah.
And at that time, and years leading up, there were some major, I don't want to say scandals, but discrepancies in the management. But the Indiana Farm Bureau did not want that power taken away from them.
Okay.
So they were lobbying heavily against my bill. And the governor then was Governor Evan Bayh, and his legislative liaison came to me and said, the governor is supporting of your bill, and he will support your bill, which meant that the governor would urge the Democrats in the House to vote for my bill.
Yeah, wow.
And those, and I had Republican support too, with the exception of those who lived in the rural areas where the Indiana Farm Bureau was strong. And it got so bad that I was telling the liaison, I said, the Farm Bureau's just beating me up. Their lobbyists in there every day urging legislators to vote against that bill.
Yeah.
So the governor called in the president of the Farm Bureau along with their chief lobbyist and told them to back off, that he was favoring that bill, and they agreed to. Well, they got caught. They continued, the lobbyists continued to covertly lobby against the bill and got caught. And so the governor called him back in and told the lobbyists that he was not welcome back in his office, and that he would personally take affront to any legislation that the Farm Bureau wanted. So they backed off and got the legislation through, and that had a major impact on all Hoosiers in the operations of the state fair.
Wow.
The members of the board had their own credit cards. They were staying at the hotels when they come down for meetings. The manager at that time was having his vehicle worked on by the mechanics there. I went and took a tour, and I mentioned that there was the dormitory, 4-H dormitories need to be painted, and they had easily 300 gallons of paint sitting down there that wasn't even being used, and it was just not managed properly.
Yeah. Sounds like there's quite a bit of sketchy things going on as well. So that's, yikes.
And so Evan By was out here, and we hosted a breakfast for him. The association did, and he brought that up, that I'd sponsored that legislation, that it was a major change. The other historic note is that, to my knowledge, and according to the beat reporter, political reporters, former Governor Robert Orr came in and testified on behalf of the bill.
Wow.
Yeah.
Jeez.
And he claimed that they had tried to make changes to the Fair Board since 1948. But he said outside influences would not allow that to happen.
Oh, my gosh.
And Representative Jones's bill is, some words I'm paraphrasing now, but is long needed. And we got the bill out of committee, and we got it out of the House, and Bill Swords got it out of the Senate, and Evan By signed it.
Wow, okay. And so how long was the process of trying to get that bill finally passed? Was it like something that took a ton of time? Did it take years, or was it...
No, well, that bill that I sponsored, we got it out in one session.
Okay.
But the Speaker of the House was holding it, allowing the Farm Bureau to have as much time as they could get to count their votes.
Wow.
And finally, they realized they didn't have votes to stop it, and he handed it down, and I presented on the floor, and it passed.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty wild. Okay.
But one of, if I may, Ben, this outside of after my legislative days, I lobbied for a while, and I was approached by a group called Friends of Hoosier Hysteria, led by Bobby Plump, and as you may recall, there was a move to do away with single-class basketball tournament in Indiana.
Interesting.
And go to a class tournament.
Okay.
And so I was hired by them to lobby, and that was one of the most interesting because it took on national attention.
Yeah.
And there were people, making comments, former basketball players, Oscar Robertson. I don't know if Larry Bird did, but Larry Buell was carrying the legislation, and it really got to be, my son Brett and I lobbied on behalf of them, and everything that I understand that we made our points on, what reasons not to change, including interest by the public, and lost revenues, etc. That's all come to fruition based on the people that I know that are close to the scene. But we lost.
Okay. So that's interesting to me because since you've done a lot of lobbying yourself, and as well as worked with lobbyists when you served in the General Assembly. From your experience, what is the appropriate role for a lobbyist to serve? Obviously, since, as you mentioned earlier, it is kind of a controversial topic to a certain extent because the public doesn't always have a great view of lobbyists. But what's the ideal role for a lobbyist then in government?
Well, that's a good question, and that's come up in the past, previous interviews, and people ask an opinion. Well, what should lobbyists do? There are different types of lobbyists. Yeah. You have, for example, when I was a lobbyist for the Arizona Contractors Association, I'm representing the interest of an industry. Then you have what I call the hired guns. They're lobbyists that will have several different clients, and they're usually articulate, intelligent individuals who bring a bill to you or approach you about, we're not in favor of this bill because it does this, this, or that.
Yeah.
And the industry lobbyist, and that might be, for example, not only industry, but like the Indiana State Teachers Association, their interests are specific to education.
Yeah.
And they're knowledgeable and usually have a historic perspective on why we have certain legislation and why we don't. So the role is to be a liaison between their interest groups and the legislators, and to keep the legislators informed about legislation as to the positive aspects of it and the negative aspects of it. And as I indicated earlier, in some cases with some lobbyists, you have to ask the right questions.
Yeah.
In other cases, they'll come out and just tell you, a good lobbyist say, here are the positives, here's what you're going to hear about the negatives of it. And then they try to get offsetting arguments to it. But a lobbyist, I think they get a bad rap.
Okay.
Most of them I've found were professionals about what they did, who they represented, whether it was firefighters or whether it was teachers or the petroleum industry, the coal industry, the agricultural community. And, I think that one of the things, Ben, that makes the legislature good is that you get the butcher, the baker, and the candlestick maker.
Right.
You have people from all walks of life. And I know at one time that lawyers had a great deal of influence or representation in the legislature. But I like to see the variety, and it was incumbent upon us that if we knew, if we had insight as to a piece of legislation that particularly impacted an area that you're familiar with. If you were a teacher, you should get up and speak to the bill.
Yeah.
From your personal experience. If you were a doctor and there was a particular bill, it was incumbent upon you to get up and say, I looked at the bill, I think it's good, or I think it's bad. But there are people who can say, well, that's a vested interest. No, it's not a vested interest. It is an experienced opinion and evaluation. So I like that aspect of it, to have people from different walks of life.
Sure. Yeah, okay.
And you learn more as a legislator.
Right. Yeah, of course. All those experiences and interactions, yeah.
Yeah.
When it comes to interactions with other members of the General Assembly, what was that like?
Well, for me, it was a unique experience. That there are cliques in any organization.
Yeah.
And there are internal politics within any organization, and every organization.
Yeah.
And the House of Representatives is no different. Those individuals who want a chairmanship cater to the desires of the Speaker of the House, because he's the person that's going to appoint them to committees.
Sure.
So if you want on certain committees, then you have to cater to the will of that Speaker. So it's a powerful position. Secondly, the internal presence of the Marion County delegation, which was the largest delegation, because it's the largest, by population, largest county. And the internal, or let's say the desires for upward mobility in the political ladder creates internal, let's say, animosity, amongst your fellow legislators.
Yeah.
And so certain cliques are formed, and that's just the way it is. Politics. You got the external political perspective, and then you've got the internal, and the internal can be pretty bloody.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah.
I don't know if I'm following the lines of other legislators from my perspective, but since it's my view, I'm giving it to you.
Oh, sure. I mean, yeah, I get a wide range of perspectives on all topics. So, I mean, at this point, yeah, I've interviewed, about 50 people. So it's quite a variety of viewpoints. So I don't think anything is strange at this point.
Okay. All right.
So yeah, no worries at all. I think your perspective is probably, I think I've even heard your perspective shared on several occasions. So, in terms of the differences between the House and Senate, I've heard a lot of people talk about sort of their impressions of both. What about your impressions?
Well, you just look at the numbers. In the House, you will have 100 personalities to deal with, and then on the Senate side, you have 49, 50 including you. So, you need to be articulate, and you need to be able to sell. And I'm speaking in terms of getting your legislation passed.
Yeah.
And the other thing that was interesting in the process, when you go back to the process, and we went through this one year, and I was turned out to be a key factor, but and it might have been the year we were tied 50-50, but there were two different budgets. You had a Republican budget and Democrat budget. But in any case, even when I sat on Ways and Means, we would work getting a budget put together, and then they had input from the governor's office, and you get a budget put together. And you had to give and take with a lot of legislators to get them to vote for the budget.
Yeah.
And they hold out. Joyce Brinkman was notorious for holding out, and there were a couple others. But then when it went over, it really didn't matter too much what we put in, because when it went over the Senate usually got their version. They would redline ours and go through what they wanted, how they wanted to change it. Then it would come back and have to go to conference committee. And the Senate, basically, in my opinion, had the final say on it.
Okay.
On the budget. And to me, it just seemed like, well, what a waste of time. We might as well just come up with some kind of a budget, pass it over there. And then those days, they had some very talented people. Dr. Boris, Larry Boris, was chairman of the Senate Finance, and then Morris Mills had strong influence on it. And they were brilliant people and very good at it. But as far as saying, well, we passed out the House version of the budget, hurrah, hurrah, that was just a piece of paper going over there. And then it was going to change. The Senate was going to do what they wanted to do and what the governor wanted. And then it'd come back to conference committee. And I'd say 9 out of 10 times we bent with them, and we folded, and they got what they wanted. So,
okay.
I appreciate the fact that Pat Kiley wanted me on Ways and Means. I enjoyed the experience, but it just seemed like, and we went hours and hours. We met like 3 or 4 times a week. And,
wow.
and because Morris Mills and Larry Boris, their Senate districts overlapped my House district, when I would go to those Republican clubs or the organizational breakfast at Perry Township, we would have a perspective of one way on the budget, and Morris would say, well, we don't like the House's version of it, we're going to do it this way. And it was kind of like, well, we're just wasting time here. Just let them draw up the budget, and then it's bad.
Right.
That's what it's going to end up doing. But we'd spend months, weeks working on it.
Wow. Now, in terms of how the House and Senate behaved. I've heard a lot of former legislators say that the Senate kind of felt more highly of themselves than the House. Did you get that vibe as well, or?
Well, it's referred to as the House of Lords.
Yeah.
in Parliament, and they do carry a lot of power, and I think you just have to accept that that's the way it's structured. Whether individual personalities became arrogant, well, power corrupts. I would say corrupts, but it influences people's image of themselves. And but I've seen House representatives who went from the House to the Senate, and their personalities changed.
Sure.
There's the old adage, it's nice to be important, but it's more important to be nice.
Yeah. Let's see. How was legislative business conducted outside of formal votes and committee meetings?
Well, that's a good question. I found I would frequent the press club and actually had a table over there that sat about 12 or 15. And some of the lobbyists would come over and have lunch. And sometimes they'd come over and have cocktails. The legislators in my peer group would come over. And we could sit there and discuss the legislation and get educated to it and have informal debates. Now, that's not much difference than when the Continental Congress was formed and they went over to the inn across from Carpenter's Hall, and they would sit there and have their ale and discuss the bills.
Right. Yeah.
And so you get the opportunity to really chew on the rag, particularly on controversial legislation. Run-of-the-mill legislation, you didn't get too much out of it, except if there was a stinker in there. And we had one that was the year that legislation passed for child protective seats in automobiles.
Yeah.
And that's motherhood and apple pie. Who doesn't want to protect your kids? Until it was brought out to me that you had to read the language, that there was proprietary language in there that just made one company out of California that their seat would be acceptable.
Okay.
So that went through either public safety or transportation. I was on the committee, and we got that changed. Now, I possibly would have not known that if it hadn't been brought out to me.
Yeah.
So operating outside, yes, you're going to have, a lobbyist might take you to dinner, or they might take you to a ball game, and people say, "Well, we don't think that's right." That is no different than the business world. Mm-hmm. If you have a client that you want to get business from, you entertain them. Now, if it's extravagant, that's different, but there are limits. You have to report all that.
Yeah.
But primarily what the lobbyists are looking for is access.
Okay.
If they can get access to you, that if they call you at home, that you're not offended. If they say, "Hey, can we go out and have lunch? I want to talk about that," that they have an agenda.
Right.
You just have to listen as to whether or not is it good or is it bad?
Yeah.
And if it's bad, you just say, I can't go with you on this.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I suppose, there at times there can be kind of a line that is kind of murky as well. That's difficult for people to make decisions on because you're dealing with lobbyists all the time, and you'll probably also get to know them after a while too. So
they actually they can become friends.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. When it came to voting on legislation, did you always have a pretty good idea of how people would vote before they actually voted?
Pretty much so. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Individuals who had a personal vent on raising taxes, let's say.
Yeah.
They wouldn't vote for it regardless because they don't want to go back and tell their constituents that they voted to raise the tax.
Right.
You knew how they were going to vote.
Yeah.
And then other areas, legislators usually make their personal preferences known. And so you get a pretty good idea on how they were going to vote even before the vote was taken.
Yeah. Okay. How influential would you say party leadership was when it came to passing legislation?
Well, I will say that John Sweezy did not really lean on the Marion County delegation specifically,
Okay.
at least at our luncheon meeting. Now, one he did, and that was one when Bob Orr was governor, and John Mutz was going to run. He was lieutenant governor wanting to run. And Bob Orr or John Mutz, or both of them, had concluded that the reason Governor Orr ran like 200,000 votes behind Ronald Reagan in the general election was over the license branches. And the license branch structure was when there was a piece of legislation put in, I'm sure the Republicans did it, that the party of the governor, that their county chairman would get the management and operations of the license branches in that county. And it's very lucrative. And so Bob Orr and Mutz concluded that that's why Bob Orr fell so far behind Ronald Reagan. Now, I don't know that it was or it wasn't, but they went to Mills, Senator Mills and Senator Boris, to put in legislation to take that away from county control, which would be a risk. If I do that, they would have blackballed me in a New York minute.
Okay.
And I do remember John endeavoring or urging them not to put that bill in, and they did anyway.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, interesting. All right.
And Mutz didn't get elected.
Yeah. Okay. How would you say your legislative service affected your family life?
Oh, I've talked to my sons about it. Then it took a lot of time away from work. It took a lot of time away from family. The average person, I would think, would find it very demanding.
Mm-hmm.
I was fortunate. I was vice president corporate affairs for two large construction companies, and they gave me the time to do that. But we also had started up the family business. So between my 8-to-5 job, my legislative responsibilities, and my family business, it was very time-consuming. But I talked to my boys about it after they got older, and they both said that, really, Dad, we were doing our things with 4-H and with football and baseball and basketball, and my wife carried the load of seeing that they got to practices. And
yeah.
But they both said, because you were there, we got to do things a lot of other kids didn't get to do.
Yeah.
And so they were appreciative of it. They didn't seem, but in some cases that may not be the case. It is very demanding.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I've heard a lot of people talk about just, there's a lot of sacrifices that can be made when you're serving, especially if you don't live close to Indianapolis. Interesting.
Yeah, it is. And even in that comparison, my good friend Vanita Becker, she was a seatmate for a long time. Well, she was from Evansville.
Yeah.
Well, on Saturday morning, she would go to her meetings of constituents, and she could hit it in one meeting.
Mm-hmm.
I had Perry Township meeting, Franklin Township meeting, Decatur Township meeting, Wayne Township meeting, and then plus the Marion County luncheon meeting. there are a lot of demands on the Marion County, and I also can appreciate there's a lot of demands for her, like going to Evansville or those that have to go up to South Bend. If you've got to drive that at the end of a long week, it wears you down. Now, some of them would catch a plane and fly if they had to be back, but it's grueling on them to travel and then spend a whole week away from home. We did, if you lived in Marion County, we did have the opportunity to at least sleep in your own bed at night.
Yeah, yeah. What would you say was the most controversial legislative issue during your time in the General Assembly?
Well, there was a legislator from Anderson, Indiana. I can't think of his name right now, but he was a deputy sheriff, and he put in a bill that would require the state by law to castigate someone convicted of either pedophilia or rape.
Wow, okay.
And his name just about came to mind. I can't think of it right now. But he got on Jerry Springer's show. It was on a lot of the national media picked up on it. And I'm surprised and really embarrassed that the speaker handed it down.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it got killed. But as far as controversial,
yeah,
that certainly was. I mean, this guy was so wired up. He carried his gun into the chamber under his coat, but he was really pissed when it got defeated on the floor.
Wow, okay, yeah. I can see where that would be controversial, yeah, interesting. All right. What legislation would you say that you had to work the most on in terms of amount of time you spent on it?
Well, I think that the legislation of changing the composition of the Indiana State Fair Board, by far I had to work on that.
Yeah. What would you say was the biggest hurdle you had to overcome during your time in office?
Well, I think just the internal clique within the Marion County delegation. I had, as I indicated earlier, I never lost a bill in the House floor in 9.5 years.
Yeah.
But the Marion County, they were elements of the Marion County organization that they wanted me to march to their beat, and I was a little more independent than that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I would describe myself as a physical conservative, but a social moderate.
Yeah.
They wanted conservative all the way through. And I saw, as the years went on, they were bringing in more entrenched conservatives. And, you know, I get it, that's the party, and they want to believe that that's the will of the people, but I can say that there were a lot of conservative people who were being misled.
Yeah. So over time, did you witness increasing political polarization because of this, or?
Yeah, I think that the issues it followed the national paradigm.
Yeah.
Support or be anti-abortion, support gun legislation, the guns rights legislation, and you know, beat the teachers down, and you know, that kind of that's kind of people they were looking for.
Yeah.
And they weren't looking for individuals that could see both sides of the story. Mm-hmm. They wanted, you know, lockstep. This is our mantra, and this is what. If you can't do that, then we'll get somebody else.
Okay. Wow, so it's kind of like a loyalty test, I guess, then, almost.
Oh, yeah.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, that's unfortunate. So, I guess thinking about some big picture questions now, how would you summarize your time as a legislator overall?
I think it was a rewarding time. Very few people get the opportunity to serve in a legislative arena.
Yeah.
And it is an experience that you can't duplicate in the private sector or in the corporate world. I think to be a good one, that you have to have that broad spectrum of understanding two sides to every story. And, I think the first thing you have to look at is how will it impact the residents, my constituents in my district. Mm-hmm. And then I think every legislator obviously is sensitive to the impact that it may have on their constituents. But you should be able to not polarize yourself with, if a person's a Democrat, they're a Democrat. And I found that there were more Republican individuals coming in that just saw Democrats as enemy.
Yeah.
And that's sad.
Right.
They have their perspective, their constituents elected them, but they're fellow Americans, fellow Hoosiers. Mm-hmm. They have a right to their opinion and their perspective, but it just got to the point where it was, if you were even seen talking to a Democrat, rumors would start.
Oh my gosh. Jeez.
Oh yeah.
That's pretty toxic.
It was that bad.
Wow. Okay. Yikes. Yeah, that is pretty unhealthy, I think, for a political body. Wow. Do you have any favorite stories or anecdotes from your time as a legislator?
Oh, we had the Speaker of the House assigns your office locations, mm-hmm. and he put myself and Dan Stephan and a couple of Democrats and Jim, from Frankfurt, I can't think of his name now. Anyway, he put us in there, and it was just a room up on the floor where the offices were. I don't know what it was, but it was probably 20 by 15, and I forget how. I think there were about 6 of us in there. And so we put a door on it.
Okay.
And we had the maintenance people come and put a door on it. And then we put a metal plaque on it that said, "Behind closed doors." Because there was a political column that appeared in the Star every day called maybe on Sundays, "Behind Closed Doors."
Oh, okay.
And it told behind-the-scenes stories of what was going on at the legislature. And so they took affront to it. They being either the speaker or some of that clique.
Yeah.
We came in one morning, the door was missing.
Wow.
And no one knew where it was. We went to maintenance, nobody knew anything about it. And so we had all these buttons printed up that, "Where's the door?" And several of the legislators wore them. The Speaker of the House, Mike Phillips, wore it one day, and it got to be just a sidebar issue, but it was it went on for like 2 or 3 weeks. Never did find the door.
Wow.
Nor did anyone ever claim that they took it down. We were pretty well convinced that it wasn't the maintenance. We think it was someone outside of maintenance that came in and maybe on a weekend or something and took the door down, and what they did with it, we don't know.
That's interesting. Okay. Wow. Yeah.
But there were a lot of things that went on. When we got ready to draw the maps, and the Democrats had several meetings looking at the maps, and we were getting up close to the session, and Manweiler, who was then Speaker, he hadn't even called us in to look at the maps. Well, he had called all of us in. Mm-hmm. I found out later on some of them in the clique, they got to look at their maps, and well, I'm sorry, he wasn't Speaker then, but he was our caucus chairman.
Okay, yeah.
And so Mike Phillips called me, or actually sent word through a lobbyist, said he wanted to see me. And when they said, Dave, he said, have they talked to you guys about your maps yet? And I said, no. And he said, well, they have talked to me. And he said, they're going to cut out 3 legislators in multi-member districts in the southwest area of Marion County. And he said, you're going to be one of them. And he said, probably George Schmidt and maybe Larry Buell. But he said, what kind of map would you want? So I got to draw my map. I got to draw a map.
Yeah.
And that included Decatur Township, portion of Wayne Township, portion of Hendricks County, and a portion of Morgan County, which were all, to me, they were contiguous to each other. They all had the common element of the Indianapolis International Airport, which has impacted their daily lives. And then my colleagues didn't like it because they wanted to cut me and I think George and I think Larry Buell was the other one they were going to cut out. And so it was, for me, a survival thing.
Yeah.
But that did not sit well with the leadership.
Okay. What lessons, if any, did you learn from your time in the General Assembly?
Well, I think that I learned a lot of lessons, and people, as a whole, you had a pretty good class of people, but the politically ambitious would stab their own mother in the back if they thought it gave them upward mobility in the political ranks.
Wow.
They're lethal.
Yeah. So there's definitely some power-hungry people then. Yeah.
Faye Mallory once told me that politics, she was our area chairman, and she served as county clerk and county recorder, and she was deputy or vice county chair of Marion County, a very astute political person. And she said, David, politics is nothing more than power.
Yeah.
And I think I was naive when I got into even to the council and to the House that you could go in and make changes and that people would leave their politics and their political persuasions in the parking lot. And that's not necessarily the case.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you have people, Ben, who are in the House and they want to aspire to be in the Senate.
Yeah.
Well, they want to eliminate competition around them.
Yeah.
And they want to aspire, and I saw quite a bit of that. Or it might be someone in the House that wants to run for Secretary of State. And you see them do a lot of odd things just because they want upward mobility.
Wow. Is there a way to prevent that sort of obsession of trying to get more and more power at all, or to?
No, I don't know that, Ben, that you can ever change that. At one time, I thought limited terms would be the answer, but the problem you get with that is that there is a value to historic knowledge, and if you put a limit on legislators that they can only run 10 years, then you're losing that, and the individuals who have the historic knowledge becomes staff.
Right.
And they have historic knowledge.
Yeah.
And so it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah. Okay. Did you have any regrets as a legislator?
I don't think so. I guess I could say, well, if I acquiesced with the party leadership and acquiesced to being a part of the clique, then my political career could have gone on and on. But as I said, there's a point where you have to look yourself in the mirror and say you're your own person, and you've got to, if you feel you've done a good job and you've represented your constituents, then that's the case you have to make. Whether I didn't make my case strong enough, I don't know. That it doesn't make any difference. I didn't win, and so you go on with your life.
Right.
But what a valuable experience it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure, definitely. Let's see. Did you have a proudest moment as legislator?
Yeah, I think passing the composition of the Indiana State Fair Board was an accomplishment that I was proud of, since that change, they've been working on that change since the year I was born in 1948, according to Governor Orr.
Yeah.
I also passed a bill that for Department of Transportation called Give Them a Break, and it was one that, excuse me, it was one that doubled the fines for speeding in a construction zone.
Okay.
And because I was in construction, I was appalled that there was something like 5,000 construction work-related accidents annually in Indiana.
Yikes. Jeez.
And I forget what the mortality rate was. But in any case, I was proud to get that through.
Yeah.
Another interesting one, but did not carry a broad consequences to it. But I was approached by the Department of Natural Resources, and they approached me and said, Representative Jones, we have a problem with coyotes in Indiana. And I said, yeah, when I'm out riding my horses, I see them, and I hear people, because in Decatur Township was a suburban rural area.
Okay.
A lot of people lived on an acre of property. They had maybe 3 acres. They might have sheep or horses or whatever. But I said, yeah, I hear that. They said, well, based on our calculations, there's 1 coyote for every square mile in Indiana.
Wow.
And I said, wow, that seems like a lot.
Yeah.
But they're a very coy animal. They keep hidden pretty well.
Yeah.
In any case, I said, well, so what's the problem? They said, well, the coyote is on the protected species list, so they can't be hunted.
Okay.
They can't be trapped. And the bill we're asking you to carry would to remove them from the protected species. Then we'll set up a regulations for how they can be hunted or how they can be trapped. And the interesting thing, Ben, when I got it out of Natural Resources, and that was not a problem because the staffers from Natural Resources came over and they told my fellow seatmates the same thing. I didn't think I'd have much trouble with it.
Yeah.
But when I brought it up, there are a lot of people. There were several, not a lot.
Mm-hmm.
A few people got up and said, "Oh, we're not really. We don't like this bill because people would be going out and shooting neighbors' dogs and claiming they're coyotes, and we just we've never seen any coyotes in our area, and we don't. It's just hard to believe."
Mm-hmm.
Well, there was a freshman legislator from Shelbyville, Jeffrey. Gosh, I can't think of his name right now. He hadn't gotten up all year, but he asked permission to speak, and the speaker granted him that permission. And he said, well, I'm in favor of Representative Jones's bill, and I'll tell you why. My family and I have been raising sheep in Indiana for 3 or 4 generations. We have a flock of like 1,800 sheep. He said, last year we lost 42 lambs to coyotes.
Wow.
And he said, they run rampant. And he said, currently, under our circumstance, we could shoot them in the act of killing one of our lambs. Mm-hmm. But we're not always there.
Yeah.
And consequently, we're losing them. And he said, if there's any bill that we're going to pass this year that would impact a lot of farmers, it's this bill. And so the bill passed.
Wow.
And then it was only like 2 years later that the Department of Natural Resources was called because there were a pair of coyotes that were nesting in the hedges around the State House.
Wow.
So they are more prevalent than what we thought. And I kind of chuckled to myself that that's a bill that didn't make front pages. But as I even talked to my friends and family back in Indiana, and the subject of coyotes come up, and they say, we see them all the time. You know, they killed our cat. They killed our neighbor's little dog. And we obviously here in Arizona, we have the same problem.
Yeah.
I mean, they're right here in Scottsdale. You can see them trotting down the street.
Yeah, that's interesting. Wow. It's something I don't think a lot of people probably think about much. So, I know in like Kansas, there's a lot of coyotes around. But
you can go on YouTube.
Yeah.
And they have some videos, some guys in Kansas that hunt the coyotes with dogs.
Oh wow! Okay.
And they're not hounds; they're like Russian wolfhounds, greyhounds. And once they pick those fields, those huge fields they have out there in Kansas, they just drive their trucks out and they have these trip doors. And they spot one, they open the doors, and those dogs fly out and they run them down and kill them.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, but I guess coyotes are pretty much everywhere at this point. It seems like so, at least in the Midwest and Arizona, I guess.
Yeah, according to the Department of Natural Resources, they were the only species that was actually pushed out of the east as our country grew and developed. They pushed them west. Yeah, but they've been the only species to come back east.
Interesting. Okay. Wow. Let's see. What advice would you give to future legislators or even current legislators?
Well, to have patience, be willing to work with others, use the criteria. I suggest them use the criteria of who wants the bill, why do they want it, and what's the unintended consequences of it.
Okay.
Each bill that you examine or that you want to support, you need to ask yourself those questions.
Yeah. Okay. What, in your opinion, is the most important work of the Indiana General Assembly?
Well, obviously the budget, obviously setting the educational standards that our children will be educated under. And there was a lot of politics that started playing that picture. But, and I think seeing that we have the best infrastructure for our constituents that they can have. Good roads, safe streets, safe environment, adequate energy, and affordable energy. I think any community, any society can be judged by the infrastructure that they have. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we overlook that.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, Ben, I'm sure you've heard people bitch, well, the roads are terrible. They need to be. And Indiana, because it's in the Midwest, and I'm sure Kansas had the same thing, you had to freeze and thaw.
Yeah.
So, and it's tough on asphalt. It's tough on concrete.
Right.
But what I've found over the years, people don't mind paying reasonable taxes if they can see their taxes working for them.
Right. Yeah. True. Yeah, that usually makes a difference. It's if people feel like their taxes are not going towards anything, then they get upset. And
right.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand. What does the public not know about the Indiana General Assembly and how it operates?
Well, I think that the public, there's a great void amongst the electorate about who the General Assembly is, the responsibilities they have, the time-consuming responsibilities to get there. Just campaigning is laborious. And I think that a classic example was that there was a bill that was being submitted that was, I think, allowed the telephone companies to measure or to bill on the amount of phone calls you make. And that's not exactly right, but the point being is that there were some teachers down in elementary school or middle school, I think it was, in Perry Township, and they brought the busloads of kids up, and they had to sign, "Don't vote for House Bill such and such."
Yeah.
And then they wrote us all letters because we represented Perry Township. Every one of them was addressed to Congressman David Jones. Now, I can understand middle school children not being aware of that. We're not congressmen. We're representatives. But every one of them was addressed. And apparently no teacher caught on to it that, they think we're congressmen. And we're not.
Yeah.
So it told me that, gosh, he's a big boy. But I could go to my local high school, and the athletic director, who was there when I was in high school, when I go to a football game, he'd always say, "Congressman Jones, how you doing?" "Oh, I'm doing fine, thank you." You know what I mean?
Yeah. I've heard this type of this situation happen so many times now. It's just it's amazing. Yeah, how confused people are when it comes to determining the difference between Congress and the General Assembly. Wow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I think almost every interview at this point that's brought up. Yeah.
Well, I had a local legislator here, and he was a friend of mine. He had a radio show, and he wanted me to come on as a guest speaker, and we were speaking, and he said, "Well, compare Indiana and Arizona and your experience." So I was giving him and I said, "Well, at the General Assembly in Indiana operates such and such," and I used the term General Assembly.
Yeah.
He said, "Well, David, we don't have a General Assembly here. We have a legislature." Well, it's the same damn thing. It's the same damn thing. And I told him after we got off the air, I said, "Well, Clancy, I didn't want to embarrass you on the air, but a General Assembly and a legislature is the same thing."
Yeah.
In some states, it's just called differently. In Indiana, the legislature's called the legislature. It's also called the General Assembly. So,
right. Yeah.
But I didn't know that. Well, okay.
That's funny. Okay. Wow. How prominent was like the role of money when it came to running campaigns and stuff? Like, did everyone feel like incredibly dependent on raising as much money as possible, and how influential was it when it came to how people would sort of vote on things?
That's an excellent question. Money plays a prominent role. A successful campaign requires a skilled candidate, and what I mean by that is someone that can get up and articulate their message. Secondly, you have to have a strong message. And thirdly, and maybe equally, I think equally if not more, is revenue.
Yeah.
To get your message out, you have to have the money. Now, interesting side note, that in Marion County, the state representatives and the senators were not, it was frowned upon for them to have individual fundraisers.
Okay.
The party did the campaigning. The party allocated the money. And they wanted, if you did any fundraisers, they wanted to go into the county coffer. And not, now as we developed, now we would get donations from Indiana State Teachers Association, the Petroleum Council, from various groups who supported you and thought you were a good legislator, that they would, but they had to adhere to their limitations of contributions. And we would run our campaigns off that, but they really didn't want us to go out and milking fellow Republicans by having our own fundraisers, because they thought it took away from the party's efforts.
Okay.
And in a sense, I can appreciate that because once if you're in Marion County, once you got slated, you were probably going to you had a 99% chance of getting elected anyway.
Yeah.
So they would allocate enough money to get your name out there, and that was about the extent of it.
Did you ever witness like legislators being kind of almost basically being influenced by the different places that they were receiving campaign finance from, and when it came to legislation at all, or did people not?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I did, but I wasn't in the legislature then.
Okay.
I was VP of corporate affairs for Towsley Bixler Construction Company, which at that time was third largest by volume, third largest construction company in the state.
Okay.
And they belonged to an organization called AGC, Associated General Contractors, which is a national organization that promotes the well-being of general contractors. And I got a call to come down to the president's office one day, and he said, Jones, he said, you got to go with me down to AGC's office. And we went down, and all of the presidents of the major construction companies who belong to AGC were there. And the architects had submitted a bill that dealt with construction management, which was a new service that was coming out that companies but our architects wanted to corral the market and just say that they would have exclusive rights for it. Well, our company was one that was on the threshold of going to construction management services. And as it turned out, I don't want to get into all the details, Ben, but the Speaker of the House, Kermit Burrows, and his chief of staff and the President Pro Tem of the Senate all went to prison because the architects had paid them money.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that, if you heard that story.
I'm vaguely familiar with it, yeah.
And so they my boss and the head of AGC then, a very talented young man by the name of Tony Ard, they took me over and registered me as a lobbyist. And for the entire session, I was lobbying on behalf of AGC. And then when all this came down, I got a visit one day at the office by two guys from the FBI.
Oh my gosh.
And they wanted to know if I knew or heard anything. And they, we're doing this investigation, and you're registered as a lobbyist on that bill, against the bill, and what did you hear? So I told them what I had heard, and we had found out through Tony that he had heard that the Speaker of the House and the President Pro Tem had received sizable contributions to get that. And I think it was, I don't think it was to their campaign. I think they just got outright cash.
Okay, wow. Yeah.
Payola. And I'm not positive. That's been 30 years ago, maybe. But anyway, they did end up going to prison. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, so, geez. So I guess along with like sort of the power dynamics in state government, there's also just the role of money and how that can influence people as well. Wow.
Well, money, there's no question about it.
Yeah.
Money can have a powerful influence, and you want to eliminate I don't want to say the intrigue. Mm-hmm. Eliminate temptation.
Yeah.
You want to eliminate temptation, and so there needs to be oversight and accountability, and you want to keep an honest person honest.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. Let's see, last few questions here. How would you say the state of Indiana has changed over the course of your lifetime?
Well, the last 25 years I've lived out here, so
right.
I think overall Hoosiers are looked at as pragmatic people, But I think that there's been a great deal of influence, and it started when I was in the session by individuals who were interested in their own political potential.
Yeah.
When later ran for governor, but there was a lot of misinformation that was spread that dealt with the abortion issues, that dealt with the gay community, and I think that a lot of that information stirred up in the hearts of a lot of Hoosiers polarization. And to my friends that live back there, and I'm still in contact with many of them, they're very entrenched, almost to a degree of fanaticism on those issues.
Yes.
That I think has created a real gulf and polarization amongst Hoosiers.
Yeah.
And that's true all across the country, but no question about it.
Wow. Yeah, okay. What do you want the people of Indiana to know about their role and influence in the General Assembly?
I think that the people in Indiana should know that in most cases, if not all cases, that the doors of communications are open to their representatives. They do want to hear from them. They do want to hear what their concerns are. And, not just bitching about the next door neighbor's dog,
Right.
but letting us know what we can do to make their quality of their life better. And they have access, they have priority access over lobbyists.
Yeah.
We want to hear from them. But I think in many cases there's more interest in just bitching to the next door neighbor about politicians, as opposed to trying to inform us and educate us on what they think would make their community better.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. If you don't tell anyone about your problem, then I guess it's a little bit harder to complain about it if you're not actually trying to, make a difference. So.
Well, it's not difficult to complain. That's easy.
Right.
Complaining is easy. It's communicating.
Yeah.
Don't be fearful of picking up the phone or saying, I'd like to have a meeting with you. This is something I think that we need to
Sure.
do.
Yeah.
And listen to them,
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, is there anything that I didn't ask about that you wanted to mention, or?
No, I don't think so. I think we covered a broad spectrum, and I hope that whatever I shared with you has some meaning.
Yeah, no, I definitely think it would be really interesting for people to listen to. I think you had a lot of stuff to say that I think is pretty topical for lots of different people. So, thank you so much for taking part in this project. I appreciate it.
All right, Dan, I enjoyed it.
All right, talk to you soon. All right,
Bye.
Bye-bye.